So, number one, what do you see as the actual sort of end date for the crisis? Well, two end dates. When does life go back to normal, either post-vaccine or not? And when do we actually start to emerge from the groundhog holes that we've been burrowing in for the past several weeks?
It's anybody's guess, but I'm guessing that May to June, probably mid-May is the best estimate of being able to come out of our burrow and get back to something that resembles more closely resembles normal is right. And in terms of when we reach a time that things are truly back to normal, the best estimates for a vaccine are 12 to 18 months. And the minute people find it, it's not trivial to get it into the arm of 350 million people. So, you got to think it's 18 to 24 months.
So question number two, with all that said, what does America look like in 6 months? I mean, are we still presumably social distancing? Is everybody wearing masks? What do you think that American life looks like 6 months from now?
I think masks are going to become a norm. I don't know if it'll be quite like Tokyo or other places in Japan where it is absolutely the norm, but you're going to see a lot of people wearing masks. I think people are going to be cleaning their hands incessantly. I think people are going to keep a distance from one another until, and it may vary community by community. If there are no cases in your community, it may be reasonable to loosen that a little bit as long as you have very active case finding. And if you do find a case, then you begin to do the contact tracing and those sort of things. But in communities where there still is virus in the zeitgeist, I think you are going to see people walking around with masks, keeping their distance, and cleaning their hands religiously. And I think that's the right thing to do.
What should America do? What are the big steps that we can take to prevent the next pandemic? Because this obviously is not the first and it will not be the last.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how well some of the countries in Asia reacted, it was in large part because they had a playbook that they could pull off the shelf. And they had a national strategy for dealing with this. And the national strategy had included what should the population be told and what do they need to do. And it can't be a patchwork of you do it this way in this city, you do it this way in this state. It really has to be a national strategy because this thing permeates state and city lines. It goes to red and blue states. It's got to be a uniform playbook. It has to include a testing strategy. And part of the challenge here was, we don't have a way of getting testing throughout the entire country. So we have to have a rapid fire way. Somebody at CDC has to be able to, obviously with the White House and with the health leaders, has to be able to push a button and say, there's been an outbreak in this place and it looks awfully like coronavirus and here's the playbook, let's roll it out. And I think, at least if it happens in the next 5 or 10 years, I think people will remember this and believe it. Happens 20 or 30 years ago from now, people will forget this and we'll go through the same trauma, I'm afraid.
So how should we treat the government of China after this? Obviously, the government of China not only prevaricated about the virus at the beginning, they openly lied to the WHO. They said there was no human-to-human transmission. They knew better. Obviously, they've been using some of their propaganda efforts to actually suggest that the United States put out the virus. How should the world community be treating China in the aftermath of this from a health perspective?
Well, I think this shows how interconnected we all are, and I'm not a diplomacy expert, so it's difficult for me to know how we should treat them. But I think what it has made clear is that we can't completely isolate from one another. The borders are permeable. A virus that starts in China is going to end up here, and vice versa. China reacted late and didn't do some of the things they should have done. On the other hand, once they reacted with an aggressiveness that I think probably saved a bunch of lives in China and may have saved a bunch of lives around the world. They did things that we're not capable of doing and we shouldn't be capable of doing in terms of what an authoritarian regime can do. But in some ways, I think I can understand us being unhappy with them and that influencing our relationships. On the other hand, it just shows how extraordinarily interconnected all the countries are. And if we isolate from one another, it doesn't work. The virus gets through and we have to work together better.
But finally, the measures that everybody is taking, you mentioned before that we're going to be wearing masks for a while. Is there ever a point where we go back to full normal, meaning like giant events, 60,000 people at baseball games? I sort of think at this point that all mass events are basically going to be canceled until there's a vaccine. Are all the measures we're taking right now temporary or permanent?
I really hope they're not permanent. My son works for the Atlanta Braves, and I can't imagine that we're never going to go to a baseball game again. That's too hard to even imagine. I gotta think that this is we'll be back to something resembling normal in a couple of years. It might be a little shorter than that. I don't think it will be that much longer than that. If you think about the quality of the American scientific and medical enterprise, the idea that we're not going to be able to find a vaccine for this, I find hard to believe if we completely put our full resources and full attention to it. I think for a year and a half, things are going to be pretty weird. I think they're not going to be full lockdown like they are now for probably the next month or two, probably two. But they are not going to be normal. People are going to be walking around with masks. People are going to be keeping their distance and cleaning their hands all the time. But I think we're going to reach a point in a couple of years where things will be back to something resembling normal.
If you have to set an end date for this particular crisis, when people start to go back to work, what do you think the end date is when people start to go back to work here?
Okay, it's a guess, but I'm thinking there's going to be a re-entry into the workforce sometime early summer.
What do you think America is going to look like 6 months from now? Do you think we're all going to be wearing masks? Are we all going to be socially distancing still? Are all the concerts and the sports leagues going to be closed still? What do you think America looks like?
I think we're going to have some sort of new normal, which might involve some sort of testing before group events. I could see that happening. I think many people wear masks. It's their choice. I don't think there's sound medical evidence to use general population masks. And I do not think that warning, by the way, was absent because of some kind of shortage. That's not the reason. It's medical science. So I don't think that, but I think a lot more people will be wearing masks.
What can America do to prevent the next pandemic from happening?
I think we're going to be more prepared. This has really heightened the alert. We're going to see another one. We've seen this is the third since 2003, 2004. There's no question we will see another one. I think this is really going to be we're going to try to be more prepared. We're going to learn from this, not just with vaccines, but technology to generate new drugs and vaccines, the infrastructure. And also, and I'm involved with a big effort now, making sure we understand that health security is national security.
How should we treat China after all of this, considering the lies that they told, considering the fact that if they had let everybody know what was going on, that we probably prevent, according to some studies, 90% and 95% of all casualties from this thing? How should the World Health Community treat China?
You know, I think that China, I think this sort of opens people's eyes. I hope it opens people's eyes to what the economists have known all along, which is that their economic numbers are not to be believed. This is clearly nothing they're saying about how many cases they have or anything is to be believed. They did something really heinous here in covering this up. I think China has really lost a tremendous amount of credibility in the rest of the world. And I think that changes their position tremendously. And by the way, I think a lot of other countries will be understanding they cannot depend on China for a lot of things, including goods.
And finally, the measures that we're taking now, on a personal level, the sort of social distancing, no handshaking, staying away from elderly people more, are those going to be temporary, or do you expect those to be permanent?
I think those are going to be temporary. I think we'll be more conscious of things. And we'll be conscious of it just like we have been in the past with the flu, getting flu immunizations. Everyone should get that. Everyone will get these immunizations. I think there'll be a new normal, but it will fade into a near normal.
So, number one, how should the world treat China after this? Obviously, China did not shut this thing down. They lied to the WHO. If they had revealed this information a month in advance, there are some studies that suggest 95% of all casualties could have been avoided. So how should the world treat China after this? I've heard suggestions from people that I don't think are doable, like we should just cancel our debt to China. How should we deal with China, and what sort of reparations should China be forced to pay for what has been incurred here?
So starting with the trade war, I think we've emerged from this happy talk that China is a global responsible player. China is not a global responsible player. China does not play to the global rules. And we haven't held China accountable for a very long time. We should continue to hold China accountable, and we should do it with our allies. But this is a moment to say enough is enough. We've tolerated intellectual property theft. We've tolerated also, we will not tolerate you being part of the export of a virus. So I think we got to hold China much more accountable to its global responsibilities now that we've allowed it to be part of the global economy.
Will the measures that we are now taking be temporary or permanent? This is my great fear, is that people tend to use crises as an opportunity to confirm their priors. And when it comes to the growth of government, we've never seen anything like this in so quick a time. Are the measures that we are taking now expedients, or do you think that these become a permanent feature of the American landscape?
So I, like you, worry about short-term measures becoming long-term measures. Okay, that's why we have to think about this very carefully as we implement it. Look, that risk is there, and we've got to collectively make sure that it doesn't reach critical mass, because if it does, then our longer-term prosperity will be threatened.
What can we do to prevent, a couple things that we can do to prevent this kind of economic meltdown next time a black swan event hits like this?
So we need to develop three things that we haven't developed. Resilience, the ability to live through shocks, and that starts at the government level, the household level, and the corporate level. Two, optionality, this ability to change our minds as we get better information. Don't get stuck on an old model. And finally, agility. The good news, and I think there are silver linings, when we emerge from this, we are going to have an opportunity set for this country that we have not had before. And we need the agility to respond. It will look different, but we have the best initial conditions, Ben, to respond with agility and be able to bounce back, not fully, but certainly faster than we would otherwise.
What do you think America will look like 6 months from now?
I'm worried. I think 6 months from now, there's a big chance that our economy is still hit hard, that we have pockets of social unrest. And I'm worried. This is going to be a hard journey. It's one of these things, it's like taking your kids on a trip. Even if you're going to Disneyland, if it's an 11-hour car journey, they're going to find the journey really long. And at some point, you're fed up with hearing, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Okay. I'm afraid that that's what's going to look like. The journey is going to be horrific. And I'm worried that our social fabric is going to be really stressed.
So prior to all of this, obviously, the stock market was at all-time highs, unemployment was at all-time lows. How long do you think it is before we return to those sorts of numbers?
So on the unemployment side, a long time, because certain businesses aren't going to come back and people are going to have to retool. And I'm worried about this. And I hope, I make predictions and I normally hope I'm right. This time around, I hope I'm completely wrong on all these predictions. I hope it turns out that it is a V, that we simply flick on a switch and this is just a bad nightmare. But it's going to take a long time. And same with the markets. We've come from a very special period, but we're being hit with a deadly virus that's going to create permanent scars.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Ben Shapiro Show Sunday Special. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all our future content.